Seriously, who let her in? Look at her by the hydrangeas. She's going to steal the centerpieces. The whisper was a sliver of ice in the warm, champagne-fueled air of the reception hall. Diana, mother of the bride, heard it, and her perfectly curated smile tightened until it was a brittle, painted line. Her gaze snapped to the corner of the grand ballroom, past the string quartet and the towering cake, to a small, still figure standing half-hidden by a large floral arrangement. It was a woman, old and weathered, wrapped in a dark, shapeless coat that had seen too many seasons. Her hair was a neat silver bun, but it couldn't hide the exhaustion etched into the lines of her face. She wasn't panhandling. She wasn't even looking at the food. She was just watching, her posture unnaturally straight, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. Diana felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. Today was Chloe's day. It was her day. A day she had planned for 18 months, a day that had cost more than a sensible luxury car. Every detail was perfect, from the shade of cream on the invitations to the vintage of the Chardonnay. There was no room for this intrusion of grubby, unfortunate reality. She flagged down the wedding planner, a harried young man named Marcus, whose own smile was beginning to fray. "Marcus," she hissed, her voice low and sharp, "handle that, now, before people start talking more than they already are." Marcus followed her gaze, and his shoulders slumped. "Right away, Diana, I'm so sorry. I don't know how she got past the staff at the door." He scurried off, whispering urgently into his headset. Diana watched him, her heart thumping with a furious rhythm against her ribs. She smoothed down the front of her silk dress, a gesture of restoring order to a world suddenly tilted off its axis. This was a private event at the Crestwood Hotel, a bastion of old money and discreet security. Homeless people were supposed to be kept blocks away, an abstract problem for someone else to solve? The woman hadn't moved. She seemed carved from stone, her attention fixed on the head table where the bride and groom were laughing, blissfully unaware. Chloe, her daughter, was radiant. Her dress was a cloud of white lace, her hair a cascade of blonde curls, her face alight with a joy so pure it almost hurt to look at. Next to her sat Alex, the groom, a good man, a solid man, a former army captain who now ran a successful logistics company. He was handsome, grounded, and adored Chloe. He was everything Diana had ever wanted for her daughter. This day was a testament to that success, to her daughter's happiness, to the perfect life they had built. And that woman, that stain in the corner, was a threat to the entire illusion. Diana couldn't have that. She wouldn't. The perfection of the day was a fragile, shimmering bubble, and she would protect it with the ferocity of a lioness. Alex felt a subtle shift in the room's energy before he understood its source. It was a faint hum of unease, a tightening that ran counter to the celebratory music and laughter. His training, years old but never truly dormant, had taught him to read environments, to notice the things that were out of place. He followed the discreet, worried glances of the waitstaff and the wedding planner, and his eyes landed on the old woman by the flowers. His first thought wasn't one of annoyance, like his new mother-in-law's clearly was, but of curiosity. She didn't fit the profile of a crasher looking for a free meal. She wasn't hovering near the buffet or the bar. She was observing. Her posture was the first thing that snagged his professional attention. It wasn't the slump of the weary or the defiant stiffness of the proud. It was a specific kind of straightness, a ramrod alignment of the spine that spoke of discipline ingrained so deep it had become part of her skeleton. He'd seen it 1,000 times in drill sergeants and old soldiers at the VA hospital. Her stillness was the second clue. People in unfamiliar, high-stress environments fidget. They shift their weight, they touch their faces, they betray their nervousness in a dozen tiny ways. This woman was utterly, preternaturally still. Only her eyes moved, and they didn't wander. They scanned, methodically, from the main entrance to the service doors to the position of the hotel staff. It wasn't the curious gaze of a wedding guest. It was the practiced, constant threat assessment of a professional. He saw Marcus approach two of the hotel's security guards, large men in ill-fitting black suits. He saw the hushed, urgent conversation and the subsequent nod. The guards began to move, their path a direct line to the old woman. Alex felt a prickle of discomfort. Something was wrong. He leaned over to Chloe, touching her arm gently. "I'll be right back, honey." She smiled, lost in the glow of the moment, and barely registered his departure. He stood and began to walk, not directly toward the confrontation, but on a parallel course that would allow him to intersect if needed. He kept his own movements casual, nodding to a guest here, smiling at a cousin there, but his focus was entirely on the scene unfolding in the corner. The guards reached the woman. They were trying to be discreet, flanking her and speaking in low tones. From across the room, Alex couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. They were firm, insistent. She was calm, her hands still clasped, her expression unchanging. She wasn't arguing, she wasn't protesting. She simply gave a slow, small shake of her head. One of the guards, the larger of the two, grew impatient. He reached out and placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, intending to guide her toward the exit. It was then that Alex saw it. A movement so fast, so economical, it was almost invisible. The woman's left hand, the one closer to the guard, didn't fly up in a panic. It simply rotated at the wrist, intercepting the guard's forearm with the hard edge of her own. It wasn't an attack. It was a block. A perfectly executed minimalist deflection that stopped the guard's momentum cold. It was a move from a training manual, a piece of muscle memory from a life he was suddenly desperate to understand. The guard grunted, surprised more by the technique than the force. He pulled his hand back as if he'd touched a hot stove. The woman's hand returned to its clasped position instantly, her composure unbroken. But the mask had slipped for a fraction of a second, and Alex had seen what was beneath. He was moving before he even made a conscious decision to do so. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. The two guards turned, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and relief at the interruption from the groom. "Is there a problem here?" The larger guard gestured vaguely at the woman. "Sir, Mrs. Vance requested we escort this individual out. She's not on the guest list." Alex ignored him and looked directly at the woman. He looked into her eyes, which were a startling pale blue, clear and sharp as winter ice. They held no fear, only a deep, profound weariness and something else. Appraisal. She was assessing him now. "Ma'am," Alex said, his voice softening with a respect he couldn't explain. "My name is Alex. I'm the groom. I apologize for this disturbance. Are you all right?" For the first time, her expression changed. A flicker of surprise crossed her features. She gave a single curt nod. Her gaze dropped for a moment, and in that moment, Alex's eyes were drawn to a small, dark object pinned to the lapel of her coat, half tucked under the collar. It was tarnished and dull, clearly old. It was a small set of silver wings, but not Air Force wings. They were stylized, almost abstract, with a single downward-pointing dagger at their center. It wasn't a regulation insignia he recognized from any modern branch. It looked more like something from a history book, from a war that was now just black and white photographs. The commotion, however quiet, had finally pierced Chloe's bubble of happiness. She saw Alex talking to security guards and an old woman she didn't recognize. Her mother was power walking towards them, her face a thundercloud. Annoyance flared through Chloe. Couldn't they handle one small problem without involving the groom on his wedding day? She lifted the hem of her dress and hurried over. "Mom, what is happening? You're making a scene." Diana waved a dismissive hand. "It's being handled, darling. Go back to your table." "Alex, please. Let the professionals do their job." But Alex wasn't looking at his new mother-in-law. He was still looking at the old woman, a strange expression of dawning reverence on his face. "Chloe," he said softly, his voice thick. "Look." Chloe's eyes, impatient and irritated, followed his gaze, first to the woman's face, a network of fine lines, a strong jaw, and those impossibly blue eyes. They felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Then she saw the pin on her coat, the one Alex was staring at, the small, tarnished silver wings with the dagger. Her breath caught in her chest. A memory, distant and hazy, rose from the depths of her childhood. She was 5 years old, sitting on a porch swing next to a woman with the same blue eyes. The woman was humming a song, a strange minor-key lullaby Chloe had never heard anywhere else. The woman was telling her a story about her job during a long-ago war, a secret job where she had to be a ghost. "The good ghosts wear wings," the woman had said, touching a pin just like that one. "They fly in the dark so others can live in the light." The memory slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The porch swing, the smell of lavender and old books, the lullaby, the story of the silver wings. It was a memory she hadn't accessed in over 20 years, buried under the debris of a childhood that had moved on after her grandmother had disappeared. After Grandpa died, she just vanished. Letters went unanswered. Phone lines were disconnected. The family had eventually, painfully, assumed the worst. They'd mourned her as lost. Chloe's gaze flew from the pin back to the woman's face. She saw it now. The high cheekbones, the shape of the mouth, the fierce intelligence in those pale blue eyes. It was her, older, thinner, weathered by a life Chloe couldn't begin to imagine. But it was her. The word escaped her lips as a choked, disbelieving whisper. "Grandma." The old woman's composure, the iron control that had held for so long, finally shattered. Her lips trembled and the icy blue of her eyes flooded with tears. She didn't speak. She just nodded, a single, heartbreaking affirmation. Chloe let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She surged forward, oblivious to the gasps from the onlookers, the stunned horror on her mother's face, the confusion of the guards. She threw her arms around the thin, frail woman in the worn-out coat, burying her face in the rough fabric that smelled of cold air and distant campfires. "Grandma Elara," she cried, the name feeling foreign and yet profoundly right on her tongue. "It's you? It's really you." The world seemed to fall away. The music from the string quartet faltered and died. A wave of murmurs washed over the ballroom as guests craned their necks, trying to understand the incredible scene unfolding before them. Diana stood frozen, her face ashen. The words echoed in her ears. Grandma Elara, her own mother. The woman she had ordered removed like a piece of trash was her mother. A wave of nausea so profound it made her sway on her designer heels washed over her. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, searing brand on her soul. She saw not a homeless intruder, but the face of the mother she had grieved, the woman who had taught her to read, the hands that had bandaged her scraped knees. How? Why? The questions were a silent scream in her mind. Alex reacted instantly. He put a protective arm around both Chloe and her grandmother, shielding them from the prying eyes. "Marcus," he said, his voice now steel, "my office, now." He was referring to the small study the hotel had provided for him to use as a changing room. He guided the two women, one weeping uncontrollably, the other trembling with a silent bone-deep shock, away from the spectacle of the ballroom floor and toward the quiet sanctuary of the private room. Diana followed, stumbling, her mind a vortex of confusion and self-loathing. Inside the study, away from the whispers and stares, the story came out in broken pieces. Elara's voice was raspy from disuse, but steady. After her husband, Chloe's grandfather, had passed away, the structure of her life had crumbled. For 40 years he had been her anchor, the one person who knew the truth of her past and helped her keep the ghosts at bay. Without him, the memories of her service, things she had never been allowed to speak of, came flooding back. She had been a part of the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. The pin on her coat was an unofficial insignia for a small classified unit of women who operated as couriers and intelligence gatherers behind enemy lines in the aftermath of World War II and into the early Cold War. They were the ghosts she had told a 5-year-old Chloe about. The work had left scars no one could see. PTSD before it had a name. When her husband died, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't be still. The quiet suburban life she had lived for decades felt like a cage. Ashamed of what she saw as a weakness and terrified of becoming a burden on Diana and her young family, she had simply walked away. She had drifted for years, living on a small, untraceable pension, finding a strange sort of peace in anonymity and constant motion. She never stayed in one place for long. It was the only way to outrun the memories. She had learned of Chloe's wedding through a small announcement in a newspaper she'd found in a library. The pull to see her granddaughter, the little girl she remembered with sunshine in her hair, had been overwhelming. It was a gravitational force she couldn't fight. She had traveled for 3 days to get here. Her plan was never to cause a scene. She just wanted a glimpse, to see with her own eyes that Chloe was happy and safe. That was all she had wanted, to witness this one beautiful moment from the shadows and then disappear again, content that the family she had left behind was thriving. Chloe listened, her hand clutching Elara's, her tears staining the bodice of her $1,000 gown. The story was so much bigger, so much more painful and complex than she could have ever imagined. This wasn't a simple case of abandonment. It was the story of a hero, a quiet, forgotten soldier still fighting a war inside her own mind. She looked at her grandmother's hands, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, but the fingers long and elegant. These were hands that had likely held secrets that could topple governments, hands that had been skilled in survival, hands that had held her when she was a child. And her mother had tried to have them thrown out. The anger and the sorrow and the love were a tangled, overwhelming knot in her chest. Diana stood by the door, tears streaming silently down her face, her perfect makeup ruined. The entire foundation of her life, her carefully constructed narrative of being the wrong daughter, had been demolished in a matter of minutes. Her mother wasn't a flighty woman who had selfishly abandoned her. She was a warrior who had broken under the weight of her own silent valor. The pursuit of a perfect wedding, of perfect appearances, suddenly seemed like the most grotesque, shallow ambition in the world. She had been so focused on the surface that she had failed to recognize the substance of her own blood standing right in front of her. The wedding, for all intents and purposes, was over. Not the marriage, but the party. Alex quietly informed the best man to handle the guests, to thank them for coming and to explain there was a family emergency. There would be no cake cutting, no first dance. There was something infinitely more important happening in this small room. Chloe refused to let go of her grandmother. She sat on the floor, her wedding dress pooling around her, her head resting on Elara's lap, just as she had done as a little girl on that porch swing. Alex knelt beside them, his hand resting on Elara's shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity from one soldier to another. He finally understood the look in her eyes. It was the look of a lifelong sentinel, a guardian who had stood her post for so long she'd forgotten how to come in from the cold. Today, her watch was finally over. She was home,